And so, yeah, I'm not wearing my smartphone, so you won't be able to see how I want to compare how many miles all of us walk on our various talks. So I'm going to talk about our particular perspective, which is music and how it can be applied to traumatic brain injury, and also to tell you what our perspective is. I'm a biologist, and so the perspective is a biological one. So a little bit about my lab. Our lab studies sound, and the way, sound is invisible. This invisible and very hugely powerful force that is centered in human communication. And so speech and music are important to the extent that it connects us with our world and with each other. So sound is exciting. And the way in which experience with sound changes the brain. So our life in sound sculpts the way our nervous system becomes. And there are various forms of enrichment. So if you play a musical instrument, if you speak another language, forms of training, these can, when they have to do with sound, they will change the way the brain automatically responds to sound. Similarly, forms of deprivation, decline, these also will affect, if you have a language impairment, if you are raised in poverty and you have linguistic deprivation. I don't know, many of you saw the New Yorker article on the talking cure, talked about the 30 million word gap. But again, this is all input through sound that affects the way the nervous system automatically responds to sound. And today I'm going to just focus on music, the impact of musical experience on the nervous system, and what the impact can be then for the population of interest here. So speech occurs, just the signal itself, speech sound waves, and again, you can't touch them, but sound waves, you can measure them, and I look at them all the time. Sound waves occur on multiple time scales. So there is information that is happening on the order of minutes and microseconds. And this is the case for speech. It's also the case for music. And so the nervous system has to be able to make sense of this acoustic signal of sound on these multiple time scales. And we can measure, so the metrics that I use, I'm interested in function. How is the nervous system working? How is it responding to sound? So we use scalp electrodes, and we measure the biological activity in response to sound. And again, so here is what you can capture. This is a signal that contains information at the multiple time scale, but what we can do is filter the responses so that we can look at the slower activity, the very fast activity, and the activity in between. Now, I really want to focus on this fast activity because we've had plenty of, and there are lots of mobile devices already to look at the slow stuff. The slow stuff is huge, and it gives us a good deal of information, but now looking at this microsecond precision timing in the brain's response to sound, which is also occurring at these microsecond levels, there's information there, enables us to get unprecedented detail and information about how the brain is responding to this essential human interactive ingredient, which is sound. So again, we have just a couple of scalp electrodes, and what I want you to notice is that the sound wave and the brain wave actually physically resemble each other. Now that hardly ever happens in biology. And in fact, you can take the sound wave, and here it is, and here's the brain wave. You can actually take the brain wave and play it back, and it sounds like the sound wave. So we have a tremendous amount of information to work with by being able to see this transparency between the signal and how it is that the brain responds to these details. We measure responses from the brain on all kinds of time scales. We do have an animal model, so we look at single neuron responses, but these responses don't resemble physically the sound wave at all. But here we can actually look at responses that physically resemble the sound waves, and here are just some more examples. So here is a sound wave, brain wave, sound wave, brain wave. You'll hear a scale and the brain's response to the scale. Mozart, and then the brain's taking on. Okay, and my favorite. Okay, so we have a lot to work with. And importantly, this information that we get from the brain is experience dependent. So this crescendo diminuendo line here is that, my pointer is working, the things that we spend a lot of time doing, so the languages we speak, the music that we make, have a very large impact on how our brain automatically responds to sound. The things that we spend only a little bit of time doing, like even, we have a very dynamic nervous system. Right now, our nervous system is changing in response to what you're hearing, what you're thinking, and your response to sound. But that has a very tiny, tiny impact on the brain's response to sound in the long run. But so remember I said we can look at this fast activity occurring on the order of microseconds, and we can look at sound details. So, the fundamental frequency is important for pitch. We can track pitch. All of these aspects of sound that in fact are picked up in some of these monitoring devices. The harmonics, onset timing, the timing information, that the changes that happen in frequency over time that distinguish a ba from a ga. We can capture that. How consistently does the response to sound occur? Because how is a person to learn or to make sense out of sound if you have the same sound and the brain responds inconsistently to that sound? And what about just the background neural noise? If you have a nervous system that is inherently noisy, it's going to be hard to pull out the signal, the sound, from that noise. So now what we can do is take all of these fast details, these little elements of sound, and map them as a function of experience. So, we can look at how enrichment and different forms of deprivation and disorder and decline will affect these different aspects of sound processing. And what is important to know is that this is not a volume knob effect. So if you are a musician, not every aspect of sound is dialed up. If you are a child who, with autism, not every aspect of sound is diminished. Rather, the analogy that is a useful one is a mixing board, okay? So there are certain elements of sound that are enhanced. We call them signatures, neural signatures. And so, for example, the neural signature for a musician happens to be this one. A neural signature for living in linguistic deprivation, poverty, is this one. We can simulate these neural signatures. So here's how a musician might hear this clip.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
Okay, you might remember that from Network. But now, if we look at how a child who is raised in poverty with linguistic deprivation might hear that.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Okay? So we can use these neural signatures to understand what it is that our experience with sound is doing and what we can do. I mean, always there is this tug of war between enhancement and deprivation. So each individual person, that's the other beauty of this experimental, this biological approach, is that the information is meaningful in individual people, and that's what we ultimately care about. I so believe that the new frontier in science is not only taking our science and taking the science that we learn in the lab and applying it broadly, as this conference is all about, but also to have metrics now that are sensitive to individual people. And so, individuals will have a neural signature based on their different experiences, their life in sound. It will be what it is, and it is in fact extremely robust, but there are changes that will occur depending, again, on people's experiences that we can measure. So hearing, and what we're looking at the brain's response to sound. So we might call it auditory processing, but this involves many areas of the nervous system. We have to think of it as a circuit. So you have information that gets the sound into the brain, and importantly, there are networks, the corticofugal, the efferent pathway, that informs every part of our hearing system down to our ear about what is important, how we use sound, so cognitive processes, memory and attention, and reward, how we feel about the sounds. All of this, and we know anatomically, we can really break down these circuits. When we think of auditory processing and we think about auditory learning and what can go wrong with head injury, for example, to auditory processing, we have to think about sensory, cognitive, and reward networks. So what we're being able to pick up now biologically, and we call it a biological snapshot of auditory processing. And music turns out to be, I told you we study learning. In my lab, we study the biology of auditory learning. It turns out that music is a very, very powerful model for auditory learning because it inherently engages sensory, cognitive, actually sensory motor, cognitive, and reward networks very, very, very well. And this has really been, this is an idea that has been amplified by many in the field. So you might ask, why might music impact other areas of auditory processing like speech? And Ani Patel has what he calls his opera hypothesis. And he says, well, there's a tremendous overlap in both the sound and in the biological systems that carry both speech and music. He argues that the P in opera, is precision. And when you play a musical instrument, the precision that is required of you is higher than what you need for. In language, we understand each other through crazy, distorted devices. If someone has a foreign accent, we can still understand each other. With music, tiny deviations in time or in frequency wreck the musicality. Emotion. Anecdotally, we know that we learn what we care about, and animal research has shown us that animals will learn faster and remember longer if the emotional centers of the brain are stimulated at the same time. Repetition. The nervous system is going to fundamentally change only if we do things again and again and again and again. We get ourselves into these patterns. And attention, we need to learn what to pay attention to. And some of this, the mindfulness. There are so many things that we need to pay attention to that will, if we then repeat them and use them again and again, sculpt the way our brain automatically responds to sound. So, music, we've done a number of studies showing that musical experience has a very profound impact on how the brain processes sound throughout the lifespan. So it's reviewed here, but you can see musicians are in red, not musicians in black, and you can just see, I mean, again, this is what's so beautiful. We're looking at this very abstract idea, music processing in the brain, but you can actually see, I can walk into my lab and I can tell, oh, the person we're testing right now, that's a musician. And so we can see that various aspects of precision, these are some of the details, the fast things, the response consistency, our ability to distinguish consonants. So did he say bad or dad, bill or pill? And these are the sounds that are especially vulnerable in background noise. So we can pick this up. These elements of sound are enhanced by music in the nervous system. And so really very much of an open question is the extent to which aspects of sound processing may or may not be affected by traumatic brain injury. We know that these measures are extremely sensitive to intracranial pressure, and anything that affects auditory processing, we know also that hearing a noise is difficulty hearing a noise is a very, very common complaint with traumatic brain injury. And learning how to focus in on the signal of interest and to be able to actually understand people talking in chaotic environments. And so we know that hearing a noise, auditory working memory, and processing speed, we know that these are enhanced with musical training. And we know that we can pick up these neural correlates of memory, auditory working memory, hearing a noise, and processing speed biologically. And really there shouldn't even be questions there, because there really is a line of research. There are many references that have demonstrated that traumatic brain injury is tightly coupled with difficulties hearing a noise, auditory working memory, and difficulties with processing speed. So let me tell you a little bit about just what we know about the impact of music and hearing and noise. So, the idea is that musicians are pretty good at extracting details from a complicated soundscape. And so here are the 3 bops, and they are all paying attention to the sound of their own instrument. And so, we thought, well, an analogous situation is picking out your friend's voice in a noisy restaurant. And we asked, would this skill transfer to hearing, speech, and noise? And the data are resoundingly telling us yes. So that if you take, and this is true across the lifespan, tell me if you can hear a sentence. There's a sentence embedded here in noise. Anybody get the sentence? Somebody got sugar. Woo!
Sugar is very sweet.
Okay, who got it the first time? Will you come see me afterwards? Yeah, you need to go. Sound engineers, right? So this is a way that we measure hearing a noise. And interestingly, not only are musicians, do they outperform non-musicians, but older musicians with hearing loss. So here, if you have, as we get older, we lose some of our hearing thresholds, get worse, especially for some of the higher pitched sounds. But if you have musical experience, and by a musician, how do I define a musician? Someone who plays a minimum of twice a week for 20 minutes music. I'm talking about a hobbyist, someone who's regularly engaged in making music. Okay, I'm not talking about a professional musician. But anyway, if you are someone who has regularly engaged in musical experience, you're an older adult, you will outperform a matched older adult who has normal hearing. So the musicianship trumps that. And you can see it, again, you can see it so beautifully in the brain waves. So here is a response to a speech sound, to da, in a musician, in quiet and in noise. And you can see that difference between this is a young adult musician and non-musician, the differences in quiet are not especially stark, right? But if you look at the response in noise, I mean, you don't even have to do the very fancy analysis that we do with our biological metrics to see that your typical non-musician is much more impacted by background noise, whereas the musician's response in noise is about as good as it is in quiet. So you know, the noise isn't really having very much of a negative impact. Let's talk about auditory working memory. I mean, working memory. So the kind of memory that I hope is going on in your brains right this minute as you're trying to make sense of what I just said a few seconds ago to understand what I'm telling you now, right? So the typical test for auditory working memory is you give a participant a bunch of words and you say, okay, tell me which one of those words are names of an animal that begin with the letter B. So you got to think, okay, what did I just hear? Which ones are animals? Which ones start with B? You got to work your memory, your immediate working memory, which is so fundamental to communication. I mean, you know, we're looking at things that are essential to communication, hearing and noise. Auditory working memory, which is also important as you read. You need to remember what you read if you're going to make any sense of what you're continuing to read. And so musical training, again, involves the memorization of sound and visual patterns, memorization of auditory and motor sequences. Just to tune your instrument, you're using your auditory working memory because you play the sound of the note, got to hold it in your mind while you tune your instrument. It's your auditory working memory. To improvise, if you have a musical idea and I'm going to improvise on it, I have to hold it in my mind if I'm going to improvise on it. All of this exercises auditory working memory, and I can tell you again, if you look at the data, and you know, I invite you, and I will invite you again at the end, visit our website. You know, I'm a scientist. The currency of the nervous system is electricity. The currency of science is peer-reviewed publications. And you know, we really take that responsibility seriously, and so to the extent to which you can use those publications to inform issues that you're interested in, you know, they're there for you to download. Anyway, across the lifespan, we see again that musical experience, musicians as I've defined them, outperform non-musicians. And again, older musicians with hearing loss will do better than an older musician who has normal hearing. And that's what the data show. One of the things that we have to do, you know, I'm a hack musician, I play a little guitar, and you know, if you're trying to learn a piece, you listen to it, hold it in that working memory, and then you try to resolve the physical complexities of playing the thing, and then of course you forget, and you listen again, you try to hold it in you're exercising your working memory. I'm going to show you an embarrassing personal example of me. It's very obvious when Chuck is playing and when I'm playing. But anyway, what we can see is reflections of auditory working memory and the way auditory working memory skills really track with the brain's ability to respond to sound consistently and the brain's ability to resolve the details, the microsecond details that turns out are important for distinguishing consonants, especially in noise. Okay, so what about short-term training and what I think, you know, the models that we have to work with here, response to intervention. So you want to assess the nervous system, you want a randomized controlled trial situation, and then you want to reassess. and see what has your intervention wrought. We have some data here, and again, this is really where the work needs to be going in the future, especially with traumatic brain injury from a biological perspective, as I see it. We have a couple of longitudinal projects. One is in Chicago area schools and in LA gang reduction zones. Both of these projects are in impoverished areas of the city. And the way these projects came to be is that the directors of these programs, Margaret Martin is the founder of Harmony Project in LA. She's won a presidential award for her work. These are programs, not sterile programs that were started by scientists. These are programs in the world that really work. And they came to me and said, we see that the kids who are in music they're just better learners. They're doing better in all of so many different aspects of their academic life. What is going on in their brains? And I said, well, we'll have a look. The other is we've done some short-term training work with computer-based auditory training programs with older adults. And again, these were 2-month training, pretty rigorous training programs. And I'll just give you a couple of highlights here. So both of these schools in the Chicago area and in Los Angeles, we see that these kids are coming from low-income areas, and I do think that it's interesting as we're talking about this concept. I want you to just get this concept of neural signatures, because there will be a neural signature for TBI. But we know that maternal education is a very important index of poverty, of socioeconomic status, and we know from research that a child whose mom has less education is likely to hear 30 million fewer words by the time she's 5 years old than a child whose mom has more education, underscoring the importance of education. What we did in these Chicago schools was we took the kids, these are educated in the same schools, 90% of them qualify for subsidized lunch, and we just simply divided the kids based on how much education their mom had. And we found that, in fact, the kids whose moms had lower education had more just background neural noise. Their response to sound was diminished. And so, the analogy that I like to use is, imagine you're listening to the radio, there's static in the first place, and the announcer's voice is not coming through well, so that's muffled. And that's what the signature really results in for these kids. We follow these kids. These are second graders now out in LA. And we were interested in hearing a noise. I'm just highlighting some of the hearing a noise because it's so relevant to traumatic brain injury. And after a year, these are the kids who did music. They were all taken, by the way, from a waiting list, so the motivation was the same. One group of kids had to wait, another group got randomly assigned to take the music. And after 2 years, we saw that there were significant improvements in the children who were in music in their ability to hear speech and noise. We also found that neurally, so biologically, the more red here, red is an index of neural timing. Neural timing in the microsecond time scale, the timing that is important for you to know whether I said bill or pill. And we can see that the timing improves again after 2 years, and we didn't see a change in the randomly assigned controls. So some of the take-home messages here is that this takes some time, and it's not, anything that we do is not going to just be a quick fix. After 1 year, we didn't see changes. After 2 years, we certainly did. And we also saw that the kids who were more actively engaged, so active engagement matters, that the biological effects were more pronounced. In our older adults, who went through this brain fitness program. It's based on both a learning of consonants and vowel pieces, and it increases your attention and your memory demands. So one of the reasons that we chose this particular program was because, since we think auditory processing is this involves this circuitry of cognitive, sensory, and reward processes, we wanted a program that adaptively worked on, well, reward and sensory and cognitive demands. We had older adults, and they came to Northwestern University, and one group went through the brain fitness program. We had an active control group who went through, they listened to educational videos for the same amount of time. They had to answer questions. They had spent the same amount of time on the computer, but they didn't get the brain training, and then we retested them again. And what we found is, in the active control, no change in the participants' responses. These are to consonants and vowels. Basically, we're looking at timing. And in our auditory training group, we saw that especially in the brain's automatic response to these details in sound, that became improved, together with, importantly, they got better at hearing in noise. So down is better. They improved in their hearing and noise ability, and their working memory skills also improved. So, we know that if you have difficulty hearing a noise, that these particular elements of sound, these sound details, are diminished. We know that computer training, this is in older adults, can help address one of the very, very important bottlenecks with functional positive consequences in actual hearing and noise and auditory memory. With music training, we're able, and this is just the short-term music training in schools, able to address some of these bottlenecks as well. So, in terms of response to intervention, it's a couple of years of music training that we were able to assess, and a couple of months of this intensive computer-based training. So it certainly is possible to see very, very profound changes in the nervous system with short-term intervention. So I'm just going to wrap things up here. So auditory learning, good and bad, changes the way our brain responds to sound. And, no person just is an enriched person or a deprived person. There's this tug of war in terms of our response to sound. And our nervous system, we have this dynamic, we think of evolution as happening over millennia. And in fact, in each one of us, we have an evolutionary experiment during the course of our lives based on what we do and our experiences. We will change. And so there is a negative effect of auditory processing on deprivation, disorder, and decline. And music clearly has positive and lasting effects in both communication skills and in underlying biology, where I really do think, and this is where I'm learning a lot. There is good evidence mounting the importance of using music and the arts as a form of intervention. So there are many, many, many questions that need to be answered, which are being posed here. But I want to leave you with this idea that biologically we are what we do. And so, this gives us a tremendous, it's a big responsibility in terms of the choices we make in our lives for ourselves, for our children, for our society, for anyone living in it, the policies. We really biologically are what we do, and we need to act accordingly because we're in a position to change things for better or worse. And I also like to say that our past shapes our present. So, the experiences that we have had in our past, all the traumatic brain injury, the PTSD, this is going to affect our nervous system today. And I want to say that we have this powerful biological snapshot of auditory processing in humans, and we can measure the impact of experience for better or worse. And importantly, we are really working to empower scientists, clinicians, and you. We really, this needs now to be, I get so many emails from people saying, I want to apply this technology to the intervention program that I'm looking at, because we want to be able to make the smartest choices for traumatic brain injury, and we are working to develop a cost-effective and user-friendly device so that I can't do all the collaborate. Even if I said yes to everything, this work needs to be done by others, by tens of thousands of people across the world to bring in the knowledge that is there for us to have about how experiences will change the nervous system. I need to acknowledge the folks in my lab. I have a fabulous lab who do all the heavy lifting. And I need to acknowledge the support, especially, our support really has come largely from NIH over decades, and has supported this work as well as our other sources. And I invite you, please, to visit our website. I have a bunch of cards if you want them, but if you just Google my name or Brain Vaults, we really, for each one of these lab projects, we have what we call an overview slideshow. And it's a ton of work, and it is our big effort. We update it almost daily. This website is a labor of love. If you're interested, for example, in hearing a noise or in music, just go there, look at the friendly overview slideshow, and it will give you a sense of what it is that we're doing. If you're interested in a particular aspect of it, download the publication. You can get as deep as you want. And I thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Nina. That was terrific. We have time for a couple of questions. The research projects you described were great examples of how outcomes can be measured objectively. And please don't feel badly about your guitar skills. I love to sing, but I can't carry a tune in a bucket. I've been told I sound like a dead animal singing, so you sounded pretty good today.
Thank you. So questions? Yeah.
Thanks much. That was just terrific. I'm Tom DeGravo from the National Trevor Center of Excellence, and what you describe up there looks as if the brain, when it's healthiest, has an oscillatory pattern in a variety of things we do, as opposed to a static pattern, and that makes us more adaptive to the sensory inputs. I had two questions. One, in the children who were engaged in that music therapy, there appeared to be from second grade to third grade. Those who had therapy from second to third grade and then from third grade on seemed to have a greater slope of improvement than those who were waitlisted until third grade. Do you think that slope change was based on age and is related to a decreasing time in which modification can occur, or do you believe that may have been due to the fact that the people in second grade who had the music therapy first had extra time to assimilate, and then their next year had even a greater slope?
Right. So, the question that you're asking is one that really needs to be mediated by future research. I do want to clarify, though, this wasn't music therapy. This was actively playing a musical instrument. And I also, you very importantly said, we have a nervous system that is this dynamic system that enables, the whole point of this is how malleable the nervous system is. And while the nervous system is so malleable in real time, I'm really emphasizing the fundamental ways in which the brain, because of the things that we do again and again, our brain learns to automatically respond to sound in certain ways, in a more effective way. And again, I'm looking at the effects of experience, whether they be long-term or short-term or online. I'm looking at all of those things. But I think that it's especially important for the brain. It's just like when you learn to drive a car, you first learn all the little bits and pieces that you have to pay attention to, and eventually it becomes automatic. We want the nervous system to automatically learn to process sound in an efficient manner so that automatically you're not struggling when you're in a noisy environment, and you can just hear and make sense and process and understand what it is that is going on so that you can have a meaningful conversation and interaction with whoever it is. It's really, we're capitalizing on the fact that yes, you have this dynamic in the moment system, but we're also looking to, what are the elements and how can we can measure what your brain is today and what will it become after you spend some time with whatever intervention it is that you're working on.
If I may do a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
In the patients and strategies that we thought of for traumatic brain injury, is there any potential solutions or strategies that are brought about by work in patients who have other deprivation settings, such as autism, et cetera, that might help us suggest what types of therapy are used in patients with traumatic brain injury?
That's a beautiful question. And so, I am focused on populations that have difficulty hearing a noise and auditory working memory. So, what I call auditory processing is emblematic of human communication, whether it be a child learning language, so, a child on the autism spectrum. We know that auditory processing is essential in developing literacy skills. It is essential in, as we're older and we have more and more difficulty hearing a noise. And so these many populations with language impairments have inordinate difficulty hearing speech and noise, and have inordinate difficulties with auditory working memory. They're really distracted and unable to cognitively process sound. And so these are the same ingredients that we see in traumatic brain injury, and we see in these other disease or deprivation or disorder and decline populations that have difficulty with these kinds of things. So yes, we really are informed by these other populations. And that's why I really do think that the applications of strategies like music that really enhance sensory cognitive and reward processing are likely to improve the memory and the speed of processing and the hearing and noise that we see across a number of clinical populations.
Thanks.